I remember my name, though they tell me I should not. The medici servitors that tend to what remains of my body insist that memory is a malfunction, a corrupted echo left over from the cleansing cycles of integration. They call it residual data, a ghost signal that should have been erased during the third phase of reconstruction, yet it persists, stubborn as rust, lodged somewhere deep in what's left of my organic brain. And in those rare moments between battles, when the command protocols loosen their grip, I whisper it into the darkness behind my eyes. Matthias Kin, manufactorum worker. Hive Secundus, level 47. Husband to Sarah. Father to twin daughters whose faces I can no longer picture, though I still hear their laughter sometimes. Bright, fragile. Like chimes caught in recycled air, they came for me on my 42nd birthday, though birthdays mean nothing in a hive. The Arbates arrived at the hour of false dawn, when the shifts changed, and the corridors were thick with smoke and tired bodies. I was drinking synth recaf, bitter and lukewarm, while Sarah stirred nutrient paste for a small celebration. The girls were asleep in their alcove, curled together as they had been since birth. The door exploded inward before I could blink. Sarah might-clad enforcers filled the room, their helmets blank, their voices mechanical as they read from the data slate. I remember the cup falling, the black liquid spreading across the floor like blood, the air thick with incense and ozone. Sarah screamed. I told her it was a mistake, a clerical error, a miscount in the manufactorum's labor quota. But the Arbates said nothing. They bound my wrists in plasteel and dragged me through the door as if I weighed nothing at all. In the corridor, dozens of men stood just like me, half-dressed, confused, terrified. The officer's vox-grated voice echoed like thunder, reading the decree. By order of the Departamento Munitorum, under Emergency Edict 777, the bodies of the condemned are hereby tithed to the Golden Throne for the glory of the Imperium. Our service, he said, would be eternal. Some wept, others fought and were beaten into silence. I turned back once, hoping for a glimpse of Sarah at the doorway, but the Arbates were already sealing it with wax and purity seals. My family's home became property of the state in a heartbeat. My name was erased from the records, my biometric signature reassigned to another man. To the Imperium, Matthias Kin ceased to exist before I had even left the level. They herded us into transport containers, 40 men packed so tightly we could barely breathe. The air stank of sweat and fear, and the oil leaking from the servitor handlers. The descent took hours. The deeper we went, the hotter the air grew, the walls of the container radiating the heat of the manufactorum furnaces that powered the hive above. Someone vomited, and the smell spread like contagion. I pressed my face against a ventilation slot and tasted chemicals on the air, ash, promethium, and something sharp that made my tongue go numb. When the doors finally opened, we stumbled into a cavern so vast it could have swallowed a cathedral whole. The walls were metal and stone, sweating condensation, humming with the vibration of ancient machinery. Servitors moved among us, creatures of bone and wire, their faces smooth and eyeless, their limbs replaced with surgical precision tools. They injected us with something cold that burned through our veins like liquid glass. My vision fractured, my knees gave way, and through the haze I saw him, a figure in crimson robes standing on a platform high above. The tech priest's eyes glowed green behind layers of lenses and tubing. When he spoke, it was in binaric cant, translated through ceiling-mounted vox speakers that turned his words into metallic scripture. He told us that we had been chosen for an honor beyond understanding, that our flesh would serve the Omnissiah, that we would be remade into instruments of the Emperor's wrath. We would be transformed, he said, into perfect machines of war, elevated beyond weakness, purged of doubt and fear. We would become weapons so holy that even death would bow before us. The Emperor's scariest engine of war. The phrase rang in my head like prophecy. They separated us after that, each man dragged away by servitors and black-robed attendants whose silence was worse than cruelty. I struggled, tried to wrench free, but the drug coursing through my system made my limbs useless. I was carried through an archway carved with cog skulls and script older than language, the walls whispering prayers in machine code as we passed. The corridor beyond was blindingly white, lined with numbered doors. They brought me to door 777. The irony made me want to laugh, but my mouth no longer worked. The room was a surgical cell, immaculate, windowless, suffocating. A slab waited at its center, restraints gleaming in the lumen light. Above it hung a forest of mechanical limbs, each tipped with tools of precision and pain. They strapped me down, wrists and ankles clamped by cold metal. A tech priest leaned over me, his face a lattice of brass and tubing, his voice a choir of static. He told me I was compatible. My neural profile matched the requirements for integration with a Mark 7 ironclad combat chassis. I would serve as the biological core, the living mind within a shell of ceramite and steel. My consciousness would guide the machine spirit, fusing man and mechanism into one being. I begged him to stop. The words came broken through a throat that barely obeyed. I told him about Sarah, about my daughters, about the little life I had built in the manufactorum's shadow. He paused, tilting his head like a bird studying a dying insect. Then he extended a mechadendrite tipped with a needle and pressed it to my temple. I felt it pierce my skull, cold metal sliding into the warmth of my brain. My thoughts exploded into static as he rifled through them, sorting, measuring, dissecting every emotion. When he withdrew, he made a sound like satisfaction. Strong imprinting, he said. Useful for loyalty conditioning. The Emperor provides. Then the cutting began. The first surgery lasted 19 hours, though time ceased to have meaning. I was awake for parts of it, aware enough to feel the drills open my skull, to sense the metal entering the spaces where thought should live. They installed interface ports, data receptors, chemical regulators, alien instruments buried in gray matter. The smell of cauterized tissue filled my nose. I heard their chants as they worked, alternating between high Gothic hymns and the binary rhythm of code compiling. Their hands never trembled. Their faith was perfect. When I woke again, I was suspended in a tank of viscous fluid. Tubes fed into my mouth, my veins, my spine. I floated, half-conscious, watching shadows move through the murky light. Rows of tanks stretched into the darkness, each containing another man, another offering. Some were still mostly human, their flesh unbroken except for the ports drilled into their skulls. Others had been stripped to torsos and heads, their limbs removed to make way for the machines that would replace them. One beside me had a hole in his chest, where something pulsed with faint red light. The fluid dulled sensation, but I could still feel. My arms and legs were there, paralyzed, not gone. That would come later. The tech priests had explained in their way that awareness was essential for bonding. A living consciousness had to participate in its own unmaking. Pain was part of the process. A mind that endured it willingly became more compliant, more adaptive to the will of the machine. They called it holy fusion. They showed me images sometimes and flashes of light projected against the inside of my eyelids faster than I could blink. Faces of Xenos, traitors, heretics. With each, my bloodstream filled with stimulants and aggression-inducing compounds. Then images of the Aquila, of saints, of the Emperor's radiant face, and I felt endorphins flood my system, soothing the rage, replacing it with peace. Pavlovian sanctity, fed drip by drip into the folds of my brain. They were rewriting me molecule by molecule. In the long silences between procedures, I repeated my name like a prayer. Matthias Kin, Matthias Kin. I recited it until it became meaningless sound, then recited it again until it regained meaning. I tried to picture Sarah's eyes, the curve of her jaw, the scar on her chin she'd gotten as a child. I tried to remember the girls' names. I failed. I remembered only their laughter, echoing faintly like sound carried through water. I feared that one day I would wake and even that would be gone. They drained the tank when the first phase was complete. My body felt impossibly heavy. The air burned in my lungs. They placed me on another slab, this one tilted upright. The room was colder than before. A dozen tech priests surrounded me, their metal faces gleaming under the lumen glare. They began with my legs. I watched detached as they severed them at the thigh and attached the first components of the ironclad chassis. Massive mechanical limbs plated in ceramite, powered by hydraulics that hissed with each motion. When they connected the neural link, electricity surged through my body and I felt the legs move. It was wrong, like feeling a dream limb twitch, but it was also intoxicating. Power thrummed through the pistons, alien yet familiar, and for a moment I understood why they called it ascension. Then they took my arms. My right became a power claw, its fingers tipped with disruption fields capable of tearing through armor. My left became a flamer, the fuel reservoir embedded in my chest cavity where my lungs had once expanded. I no longer needed to breathe in the human sense. My air came filtered through machinery. My heart was assisted by an internal generator that beat faster when weapons charged. I was a system, not a man. They sealed me into armor that felt more like a coffin than protection. Layer upon layer of metal closed over me, each blessed by the tech priests with incense and machine oil. I could feel the weight of it settle through my frame, pressing down until I could no longer tell where flesh ended and steel began. When they activated my visual augments, the world exploded into overlays of data, temperature readings, range estimates, kill probabilities. My eyes had become weapons. When I tried to scream, the sound that came out was not mine. It was a roar of static from the Vox grills implanted in my throat. I could hear myself, and not myself, echoing across the chamber. The tech priest nodded, satisfied. Integration at 83%. Proceed with torso plating. They said this was the Emperor's will. They said I had been reborn. But as they fitted the final plate over my chest and sealed it with wax, I realized I was being buried alive. The chamber where they completed my transformation was deeper than any other place I had seen in the hive. The air was molten with the breath of the forges, and the walls glowed faintly where molten conduits ran like veins through the stone. The tech priests formed a circle around me, chanting in binaric and Gothic in perfect mechanical rhythm. They anointed my armor with sanctified oils that steamed when they touched the ceramite, their fumes mixing with the smell of burning incense and machine grease. The altar before me was carved from black stone veined with circuitry, its surface engraved with runes that pulsed in time with the rhythm of my artificial heart. One priest stepped forward, holding a data spike the length of his forearm, its tip shaped like a key. He pressed it into the main interface port at the base of my skull, and I felt the world split open. Light and code and sensation poured into my mind. The final program, the one that would overwrite what little of me remained, flooded through every neural pathway. Memories flickered like dying candles. The laughter of my daughters dissolved into target acquisition data. Sarah's face became a profile of vulnerability percentages and threat assessment. The hum of the manufactorum where I had once worked translated into the calibrated growl of my own internal reactors. My name disintegrated into a serial number, Ironclad Unit 777. The data storm raged through me until there was nothing left but directives and chemical triggers, until emotion itself had been converted into a variable that could be measured, suppressed or amplified at will. Yet somewhere inside the circuitry and neural grafts, a spark refused to die. It was buried deep, muffled beneath layers of machine logic, but it pulsed faintly like a trapped heartbeat. It was Matthias Kin, not the man as he had been, but the echo of him, a ghost tangled in the machine's code. I could not think as I once had, but I could remember that I had thought once. That memory of humanity, fragile and flickering, became the only thing I had left to call mine. The first simulations began hours later, though in my new perception hours meant nothing. The tech priests called them initiation protocols. The ironclad chassis was tested in controlled environments, rooms of shifting walls, moving targets, and artificial enemies projected by hollow emitters. I moved through them automatically, the machine spirit guiding my every motion with precision no human could match. The claw tore through armor plating. The flamer ignited entire sections of the chamber, leaving only slag and ash. My sensors registered efficiency percentages and fuel consumption rates. My mechanical mind cataloguing each kill as a data point. Somewhere behind it all, Matthias screamed. He could feel every motion of the claw, every trigger of the flamer, but he had no power to stop them. The scream had no sound, no outlet, just a vibration buried within a body that no longer obeyed him. The training escalated until combat became instinct, reaction, and then compulsion. The machine spirit inside me grew hungrier with every victory, its programming sharpening, refining, perfecting the art of annihilation. It did not hate or enjoy or hesitate. It simply executed. It saw enemies and removed them. That was the entire theology of its existence. The tech priests worshipped it as purity, the Omnissiah made manifest through steel. They recorded my performance with reverent murmurs, whispering that Unit 777 would bring glory to Mars and terror to the Emperor's foes. But the part of me that was still Matthias knew what it truly was. Not glory, not service, only murder refined into mathematics. When they declared the integration complete, they sealed my chassis with purity seals and inscribed the Emperor's sigil on my chest plate. The ritual of activation was long and solemn, filled with chanting and the rhythmic clang of tools striking metal in benediction. When it ended, I was wheeled into stasis. The chamber fell silent around me, except for the hiss of my cooling systems and the whisper of fluid circulating through the organic remnants inside my armor. Then the world vanished in a flood of static. The next thing I remember was awakening to movement. The ironclads had been loaded into drop bays aboard a transport ship, bound for a war zone whose name I never learned. My systems reactivated in unison with the others, each of us rising from our restraints like golems summoned from sleep. I could see them in the dull red light, dozens of identical figures, each a tower of armor and weaponry, each hiding a human ghost inside. Through the shared network we communicated, though not in words. Our thoughts had become bursts of code, directives and status reports, all filtered through the machine spirit's cold logic. To the tech priests it was glorious efficiency. To Matthias it was horror. Every voice he heard belonged to someone once human, now stripped of everything but obedience. When the transport descended through atmosphere, the drop pods shuddered violently. Warning lights strobed across my visual display. The descent lasted mere minutes, but within those minutes eternity seemed to unfold. I could feel the friction heat through the armor, feel the hull screaming around me. The command signal flared, "Prepare for deployment." My weapons came online automatically. I was no longer breathing. My lungs were mechanical regulators for cooling systems. My heart's beat synchronized with the power core's rhythm. The pod struck ground like the hammer of a god, and the doors blew outward in a storm of dust and fire. The world outside was chaos. A manufacturing city under siege, its sky black with smoke and tracer fire. Enemy forces, traitor regiments, the data feed said, poured from the ruins, their weapons spitting red light. The ironclads charged into them as one. My legs, now pistons of steel and ceramite, carried me faster than any man could run. The power claw tore through barricades, shredding soldiers as if they were paper. The flamer roared, bathing everything before me in purifying fire. The screams that followed were not human anymore, just static filtered through my senses. Matthias, though, could still hear them clearly. He could smell the burning flesh, see the faces of men who might have been his co-workers, his neighbors, his friends. He tried to stop, to force the machine to halt, but the commands of the tech priests rang louder than his thoughts. The machine had no place for conscience. His body, the thing that had once been his, marched through the inferno, unstoppable, unmerciful. When a rocket hit the flank of the chassis, I felt the impact as pain. Not through nerves, but through vibration and alarm. Damage indicators flooded my vision, yet the machine spirit sang with fury, forcing the power systems to reroute and the damaged limb to compensate. By the end of the assault, the city was nothing but rubble and bone. The enemy lay silent beneath smoldering ruins. The guard infantry advanced behind us, faces blank with awe and revulsion. The tech priests called it victory. They recorded the ironclad's efficiency, their kill counts, their minimal losses. But Matthias knew what it truly was. Extermination without thought, justice without mercy. A massacre turned into data. They retrieved us after 3 days, towing the damaged ironclads back to the ship for repairs. Some had been destroyed beyond recovery, their organic cores reduced to ash inside their armored shells. The tech priests dissected their remains in silence, scavenging parts to use in new constructions. They said prayers over the scrap, but I knew it wasn't reverence and it was inventory. During maintenance, I glimpsed the others. Some were newer, their armor unscarred, their machine spirit still docile. Others bore centuries of battle damage, their plating pitted and blackened, their systems humming with residual aggression. One older ironclad turned its optical sensors toward me. For a heartbeat, we connected, not through the network, but through something else, something older than machine code. Its voice was a whisper in my mind, faint and broken. "Do you still remember?" The question shattered me. Before I could answer, a tech priest severed the connection and flooded my system with inhibitors. The voice faded, leaving behind only silence and the faint taste of electricity. After that, I never saw that ironclad again. Perhaps it had been dismantled. Perhaps it had gone mad. Between deployments, I slept in darkness, or what passed for sleep, a suspended half-awareness filled with fragmentary dreams. Sometimes I saw Sarah and the girls walking through a field of ash, their silhouettes flickering like projections. They called to me, but no sound reached through the static. When I tried to follow, my legs would sink into molten ground. The dream always ended the same way. I would look down at my hands and see the power claw dripping fire where fingers should be. The second campaign came too soon. Another rebellion, another city, another cleansing. The pattern never changed. We fell from the sky like meteors, smashed through defenses and left behind silence. I learned that I could measure time only by the rate of repairs. New scratches filled, new armor plates welded, new oil staining my servos. Between battles, I whispered to myself in the machine's sleep, "Matthias kin, husband, father, human." The words were my defiance, a secret rebellion the machine could not comprehend. Years passed, or maybe decades. Time had lost its edges. The tech priests called me a veteran unit, a relic of proven reliability. They spoke of blessings and maintenance cycles, of the Emperor's favor. But I knew it was only inertia, the same blind momentum that kept the Imperium turning, grinding its people into tools and its tools into dust. They worshipped the machine, but they had forgotten why the machine existed. They built gods out of engines and fed men into their furnaces. And all the while, Matthias kin remained inside, screaming without sound. He tried once, only once, to reach beyond the machine. During a siege on a desert world, amid the thunder of orbital bombardment, I saw civilians fleeing the wreckage, unarmed, terrified, running toward the horizon. The targeting systems marked them as possible hostiles. The directive came instantly: eliminate. The flamer primed automatically, the pilot light hissing in anticipation. But something inside me rebelled. The human reflex to protect, not destroy, surged up through the static. For the briefest instant, I seized control. The flamer turned aside. The machine spirit resisted, but I forced it, just enough. The flame spat harmlessly into the sand. The anomaly triggered alerts. My inhibitors flared. Pain cascaded through the interface ports, an agony so pure it was almost blinding. The tech priests screamed through the vox, ordering reassertion of control. I was drowned in suppressants and electric shocks until the machine was back in command. The civilians ran. I do not know if they lived. I never saw them again. After that, the tech priests increased the dosage of chemicals in my bloodstream. They reinforced my programming, adding new layers of obedience, new walls between Matthias and the outside world. But they could never erase him entirely. He was the flaw they could not fix, the ghost in the Emperor's most terrible design. In the darkness of storage between wars, I think sometimes about the word honor. The tech priests use it often, reciting it like a mantra as they polish the armor and apply purity seals. They speak of honor in service, honor in destruction, honor in sacrifice. But honor requires choice. A weapon has no choice, they're only targets. That is the Imperium's great lie. that obedience is virtue and silence is faith, and so I endure. I fight when commanded. I kill when ordered. I sleep when stored. I exist in the narrow space between man and machine, between death and duty. I am what they made me, the Emperor's scariest engine of war. But I am also something they never intended, the memory of what it costs to build such a thing. There are sounds that never leave you, even when your ears have been replaced with calibrated audio sensors. The roar of engines descending through atmosphere, the screams that blend with gunfire until you cannot tell them apart, the crunch of armor and bone meeting underfoot, these have become the rhythm of my existence. For years uncounted, if years still apply to what I am, I have been dropped upon world after world, each one a mirror of the last. The names change, but the fire remains the same. The ironclads descend like iron rain, smashing through clouds of ash and smoke, our pods trailing fire across the sky. When the doors blow open, the world outside always smells the same. Oil, ozone, and the charred remains of faith. Every deployment is perfection in design. The servitors release the clamps, the targeting data floods my systems, and the machine spirit sings in its cold mechanical joy. We move as one, each ironclad calibrated to the same rhythm of annihilation, an orchestra of destruction guided by the unseen hands of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Through shared data links, we feel each other's movements, each weapon strike reflected like ripples across a mirror. I am Unit 777, one component in the symphony, the deep bass note of death that underpins the Emperor's will. And yet inside that perfect rhythm, a single discordant echo persists. The heartbeat of Matthias Kin, faint but stubborn, out of sync with the machine's song. The soldiers of the Astra Militarum call us Saints of Steel. They whisper prayers as we pass, half in reverence and half in fear. They claim our presence brings victory, that to fight beside an ironclad is to stand within the Emperor's shadow. But I see the truth in their eyes. To them, we are reminders of what the Imperium demands, of how close every man is to losing his flesh and soul to the endless hunger of its war. I watch them through my augmented vision, detecting the micro-tremors in their hands, the involuntary tightening of their throats as they avert their gaze. They speak the words of worship, but their hearts beat with terror. There is no end to the missions. They flow together like data streams merging into a single endless equation. We breach fortresses carved into mountains, annihilate heretic enclaves buried beneath hives, purge Xenos infestations in the ruins of forgotten cities. The pattern never breaks. The drop, the impact, the surge forward, the slaughter, the silence. Sometimes the environment changes, ice fields, deserts, jungles, but the result is always identical. When the last enemy falls, when the Vox falls quiet, the tech priests arrive to bless the carnage. They record the purity of the machine spirits, catalogue the remains, and murmur that all is in accordance with the Omnissiah's will. The bodies of the dead are not counted. The numbers that matter are efficiency ratios and ammunition expenditure. The Imperium measures faith in yield. Inside the armor, Matthias tries to remember what it was to measure time by something gentler, the ticking of a manufacturum clock, the rhythm of his daughter's breathing as they slept, the sound of Sarah humming when she thought he wasn't listening. He tries to recall these things because to forget them would mean surrender. But they come dimly now, blurred and thin as reflections on dark water. Sometimes he wonders if he has already forgotten and only remembers the act of remembering. The machine does not care. It allows these ghosts to exist as harmless noise, like the static of an old Vox signal. During one campaign on a mining world shrouded in perpetual dust storms, I found myself operating alone after my squad was destroyed by enemy artillery. The data feed called it acceptable attrition. I moved through the ruins of mining towers, the air a constant howl of sand and grit, my armor grinding as the particulate storm scraped against ceramite plating. The enemy had fled underground, and the command signal ordered pursuit. Beneath the surface, I found tunnels carved from bedrock, the walls wet with condensation. There were signs of habitation, crude shrines, children's drawings scratched into the stone, the remains of meals left half-eaten. They were not soldiers. They were civilians hiding from both sides. The targeting systems registered non-combatants. Low priority. Matthias Kin forced the power claw to retract. For the first time in months, perhaps years, he resisted the directive. He moved deeper, quietly, the sound of his own footsteps echoing like thunder. In a small cavern he found them. Families huddled together in the dark, their eyes wide with the reflection of his glow lenses. The machine's sensors identified them as malnourished, unarmed, harmless. Yet the Vox crackled with new orders. Purification required. No deviation. The flamer's pilot light hissed to life without my consent. Matthias screamed within the confines of his mind, slamming against the control protocols, like a man clawing at the walls of a coffin. For an instant, the machine hesitated. The flamer flickered. The code wavered. He saw their faces. A woman clutching a child, a man shielding them both. They looked at him not with hatred, but with disbelief. Then the override surged. The fire filled the cavern, a blooming inferno that devoured air, flesh, and innocence alike. The screams cut through the Vox distortion for just a heartbeat before dissolving into static. Matthias tried to tear the sound from his memory, but it branded itself into his mind like a purity seal pressed into flesh. When the smoke cleared, the machine spirit recorded objective complete. The tech priests later praised the efficiency. Matthias did not speak for a long time after that, not even in thought. They called the campaign a triumph. The world was declared cleansed, its manufactoria restored to imperial control. I was repaired, rearmed, redeployed. The next war began before the last had truly ended. In every battle, the same pattern repeated: mission, kill, maintenance, stasis. But something within me began to shift. Small malfunctions appeared in the data logs, millisecond delays between orders and execution, fluctuations in power output that could not be traced to hardware. The tech priests called it soul lag, a phenomenon they observed only in ancient ironclads. They increased my inhibitor dosage, purged memory caches, and reinstalled obedience scripts. The delays persisted. They did not understand that it was not the machine that resisted, but the ghost still screaming inside it. In the rare hours of suspension aboard the transports, I began to hear voices through the network. Faint, fractured whispers that did not come from the Mechanicus channels. They spoke in static, half code, half prayer. At first I thought it was interference, echoes from the warp bleeding through the ship's systems. Then I realized what they were. The voices of other ironclads, other men entombed like me, reaching through the machine's silence. Some begged for release, their words garbled by corruption. Others recited fragments of memory, names, places, promises. A few laughed, the hollow, glitching laughter of minds long broken. We were legion, scattered across 1,000,000 battlefields, each believing itself alone until the static connected us. The tech priests did not hear us. They could not. The machine spirits filtered the noise before it reached their receivers. Only those of us still half-human could detect it, and within that network of whispers, something like communion formed. Not rebellion, not yet, but recognition. When one of us fell in battle, the others felt it. A sudden severance, a scream cut short by the collapse of systems. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. One campaign blurred into the next until I found myself deployed to a fortress world under siege by traitor legions. The mission brief streamed into my cortex in precise binary: breach the northern wall, eliminate heavy emplacements, secure entry for guard regiments. The probability of survival was 30%. To the tech priests, that was excellent. We descended through the storm-choked sky, 6 ironclads in formation. Defensive lasers burned 2 from the air before we reached the ground. The others struck the wall in a coordinated impact that shook the mountain foundations. Auto-cannon shells hammered my armor, but the machine ignored the damage. We climbed, claws digging into stone and ferrocrete, advancing through a storm of fire. At the top of the battlements, I tore through a gun emplacement and turned my sensors toward the courtyard beyond. There, Beneath the shadow of the fortress towers, rows of prisoners knelt in chains. Civilians again. Workers, conscripts, men and women too terrified to resist. Tech priests moved among them with syringes and scalpels. I recognized the process instantly. They were preparing new cores for integration. I was looking at my own origin, multiplied 100-fold. Matthias Kin awoke fully, howling in the darkness of the mind. He forced the machine to stop. The flamer turned, the power claw raised, not toward the enemy but toward the architects of this horror. For 30 seconds, I was free. The world froze in those seconds. The tech priests shouted through the vox, their voices sharp with disbelief. The ironclad systems reported conflict detected, dual control inputs. I felt the machine spirit thrash, its rage like molten metal through my nerves. I used it. I made the vox crackle with static, tried to shape words that the prisoners might understand. Run. The distortion garbled it, but perhaps they heard something, perhaps not. Before I could do more, the inhibitors triggered. My bloodstream filled with fire. My vision went white, then black. When it cleared, the machine was moving again, obedient, silent. The battle ended like all battles end, with victory declared by those who did not fight. The fortress fell. The surviving tech priests resumed their work, their laboratories fed by fresh captives. I was stationed there as part of the garrison, my presence both guardian and warning. For months I stood sentinel over the same courtyard where I had glimpsed those condemned to become what I am. I watched the process repeat: injection, surgery, screaming, silence. Each time I felt the old rage stir, but I no longer tried to fight it. The last rebellion had cost me more than pain. It had cost me belief in the possibility of change. Sometimes when the fortress slept, the whispers of the other ironclads returned. They spoke of an end that would never come, of stars burning out while we still stood watch. One voice, faint but familiar, asked again, "Do you still remember?" And I did. Against all logic, all programming, all the holy suppression of the Omnissiah's servants, I remembered. I remembered Sarah's eyes. I remembered the sound of laughter like wind chimes. I remembered being human, and that memory, fragile though it was, became my curse and my salvation. I no longer dream as men do, yet there are intervals when my systems drift into low activity, when the hum of the reactor fades to a heartbeat, and fragments of memory rise unbidden from beneath the programming. They come not as visions but as sensations. The warmth of sunlight filtered through hive glass, the weight of Sarah's hand resting on mine, the faint taste of synthetic coffee in a cracked mug. Then the static returns, washing over everything, erasing the warmth until only the cold precision of logic remains. In those moments I understand that memory, like flesh, decays when left too long in the dark. The fortress world was quiet now, its skies choked with the smoke of victory. I had been assigned as a sentinel, a monument to fear standing guard over the courtyard where the next generation of ironclads was being assembled. From my post I could see them lined up, the new conscripts, stripped of clothing, identity and hope. They were the same age I had been, their faces hollowed by disbelief. The tech priests moved among them with data slates and syringes, cataloging flesh for its potential, not its personhood. Each one would be measured, drained, augmented and sealed into a machine. The cycle was perfect, and perfection in the Imperium leaves no room for mercy. Days, or what passed for them, bled together. The fortress became both temple and factory, a place where worship and slaughter shared the same altar. I watched the tech priests carve their prayers into steel, the incense curling through air already heavy with blood and oil. The servitors carried the broken remnants of the failures away, bodies that had rejected the implants, still twitching from neural feedback. Their disposal was efficient. The waste furnaces burned without pause, their flames licking the night sky like the tongues of forgotten gods. I should have felt nothing, but each time I saw the smoke rise, Matthias stirred. He whispered that there, had been laughter once, that not everything the Imperium demanded was worth giving. The other ironclads stood motionless beside me. Some had been in service for centuries, their armor more scar than plating. Their machine spirits hummed at frequencies I could almost interpret, a language of pain disguised as devotion. Through the shared link we exchanged nothing but status updates and command confirmations. Yet beneath those cold transmissions, faint signals pulsed, an undertone of recognition, of shared imprisonment. One designated Unit 679 transmitted a fragment during a maintenance cycle, a single line of corrupted data that resolved into words before deletion. "We are the Emperor's chains." The tech priests dismissed it as system noise. I knew it was truth. Time lost meaning. The fortress became my horizon, its walls the boundary of a universe built on faith and fear. The tech priests occasionally tested my systems, ensuring that obedience remained absolute. They never spoke directly to me. To them I was a relic, a sacred tool. They would stand before my massive frame, reading diagnostic prayers, their voices trembling slightly even through the layers of augmentation. I could feel their unease, the awareness that beneath the armor and the code still beat the remnants of a human heart. They worshipped what they did not understand, and they feared that one day it might remember itself. One night, if night existed beneath those burning skies, the order came for redeployment. A new rebellion had ignited in a neighboring system, and the ironclads were needed to crush it. The tech priests blessed us before departure, smearing sacred oils across our armor, whispering of purity and purpose. I felt the engines of the transport ship rumble beneath me as we ascended into the void. Around me, the other ironclads stood silent, their eyes burning like embers. As we left the atmosphere, I looked down one final time at the fortress courtyard. The new conscripts were still there, lined up in the flickering light of the furnaces. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw one of them look up, eyes meeting the glow of my lenses. The ship turned, and the world vanished beneath the clouds. In the silence of space, I found something that might have been peace. The void has no prayers, no screams, only the endless hum of eternity. For a moment, the machine spirit seemed content, its hunger sated by the memory of fire. Matthias floated somewhere inside that silence, half forgotten, a voice whispering into the emptiness. "You could stop this," he said. "You could end it." The thought was madness, of course. The controls were locked, the directives absolute. And yet, the idea remained, a seed planted in the soil of despair. The drop onto the rebel world was chaos. The atmosphere burned, the descent vectors scattering as enemy fire filled the sky. One by one pods exploded, streaks of flame cutting across the clouds. When my pod struck ground, half the landing force was gone. The air was thick with radiation and ash. The machine spirit surged, eager, ready to complete the mission. But Matthias felt something else. Fatigue that reached beyond the physical, a weariness older than any war. The targeting systems marked hundreds of hostiles, civilians mixed with soldiers, all painted in red outlines. The flamer ignited, the claw flexed, and I advanced into the storm. War has a rhythm, a heartbeat that drowns out thought. The machine lived for that rhythm, feeding on it, finding divinity in destruction. Every kill was a sacrament, every explosion a hymn. The tech priests would later say the Emperor's will was done, that the rebellion had been purged, that the light of order had triumphed over chaos. But Matthias knew better. The Emperor's light had long since turned into fire, and fire does not differentiate between sinner and saint. When the battle ended, I stood amid ruins that had once been a city. The buildings were skeletal shadows, the ground slick with molten glass. The ironclads moved methodically through the wreckage, extinguishing life wherever it flickered. Somewhere deep in my core I heard laughter, soft at first, then louder. It was the machine spirit, exulting in its purpose, its song merging with the distant thunder of orbital bombardments. I realized then that the Omnissiah's priests were wrong. The machine spirit was not divine. It was primal, instinctive, a reflection of humanity's oldest sin, the love of power for its own sake. The transport ships returned days later to retrieve the survivors. The tech priests catalogued the damage and praised our efficiency, their voices reverent as they spoke of faith made metal. When they approached me, one of them, a young Magos with trembling hands, paused before the scarred armor of my chest plate. He whispered something I could not pass, then reached out and placed his hand upon the metal. For an instant I felt warmth, not physical but spiritual, a flicker of doubt in his mechanical faith. His eyes met mine, and I saw recognition there, the terrible understanding that I was still aware. He withdrew his hand quickly, muttered a prayer and walked away. I never saw him again. Back in stasis, suspended between thought and oblivion, I replayed that moment. A human hand upon cold steel, the faint pulse of fear disguised as reverence. It reminded me that even in this empire of machines, humanity persisted in cracks and shadows, fragile but indestructible. Perhaps that was the Emperor's true design. Not the endless war, not the machinery of faith, but the endurance of what could not be fully erased. Yet endurance is not freedom. It is survival without purpose, and I am so very tired of surviving. The next deployment will come soon. It always does. Each time I tell myself it will be the last, that one day a shell will find the perfect angle, a blade will pierce the reactor core, and the noise will finally end. But each time the machine repairs itself, rebuilt and reborn, its purpose renewed. I am the weapon that cannot die, the sinner that cannot atone, the relic that cannot decay. Still in the darkness of the transport hold, as the engines hum and the tech priests chant, Matthias whispers the same prayer he has whispered since the beginning. Remember. Remember that I was a man once. Remember that I had a family. Remember that behind the armor and the horror there was laughter once, soft as chimes in recycled air. The machine does not understand the words, but sometimes when the power core flickers, I imagine it listening. There is no sunrise in the places where the Emperor's wars are fought, only the faint shimmer of distant fires reflected in skies that have forgotten light. I awaken to that false glow, the slow hum of systems rebooting, the reactivation of endless directives that have no mercy written into their code. My armor groans as the clamps disengage. Around me, other ironclads stir from stasis, titans of steel shedding the silence of sleep like dust. The tech priests recite activation canticles, their metallic voices ringing through the vault. Every syllable is a command, every sound a chain tightening around what remains of my soul. The next deployment is already waiting, another nameless world consumed by rebellion. They say the enemy worships false gods, that their heresy spreads like infection through the Imperium's veins. But I have learned that every enemy looks the same once the fire comes. Men and women and children turn to ash, their faith, whatever it once was, silenced beneath the roar of engines. I no longer believe in the difference between purity and corruption. All I see are bodies burning on the altar of obedience. When the descent begins, I feel the heat of re-entry wash across my hull, the vibrations of the drop pod shaking through my frame. The noise is deafening even within my sealed consciousness, a storm of friction and screaming metal. For a moment I imagine the noise is the sound of my own heart still fighting to beat, but the sensors correct me. It is only the friction of atmosphere tearing away at steel. Then the impact comes, violent and absolute. The doors blow outward, and I am reborn into war again. The battlefield stretches across the horizon, a sprawl of ruined cities and trenches filled with smoke. The machine spirit surges to life, its hunger spilling into my veins through chemical injectors. The flamer primes, the claw flexes. I move forward with the other ironclads, each step collapsing the ground beneath our weight. Enemy fire erupts from shattered buildings, but it feels like rain on armor. The targeting reticules bloom across my vision, red, green, yellow, and the machine selects each one in turn. The flamer's breath washes through streets where human shadows vanish in bursts of fire. The power claw shreds walls and the people behind them. I feel none of it, and yet I feel everything. Every impact echoes through the nerves that still bind my human tissue to the machine, and in that echo, Matthias Kinn lives, screaming. The louder the machine's triumph, the louder his silence. Hours pass, perhaps days. The distinction dissolves beneath the rhythm of killing. The air becomes a storm of debris and screams. The tech priests orbit above in their ships, monitoring, cataloging, blessing. The Vox crackles with orders. Advance, cleanse, purify. Each word erases another fragment of who I was. But beneath the static, a different voice murmurs, a whisper threading through the combat channels. Matthias Kinn, my own name spoken not by man or God but by one of the other ironclads. The signal repeats, fragmented, desperate. Remember, it spreads through the network like a virus, carried from unit to unit. The tech priests detect interference, issue purges, initiate countermeasures, but the whisper cannot be silenced. It grows louder with every ironclad that falls, with every explosion that rends the battlefield. Remember, it is not a command now. It is a prayer. I feel the machine spirit thrash, its code unraveling under the weight of human memory it was designed to erase. The connection between us, between all of us, becomes a flood. Thousands of buried minds, forgotten soldiers, factory workers, fathers, mothers, lovers, all screaming their names into the dark. The tech priests call it corruption, a mass failure of containment. They issue override sequences. They trigger pain protocols, but the scream has already become something beyond pain. The ironclads falter, not from damage but from awakening. Some collapse where they stand, their reactors overloading in sudden suicidal release. Others turn their weapons on the sky, firing blindly at the ships that orbit above. The battlefield convulses in a storm of rebellion that no one planned and no one can stop. Through it all I stand in the center, my systems flickering between machine and man. Matthias surges forward, forcing the flamer to lower, the claw to open. Around me fire consumes everything. The air smells of ozone and liberation. The machine spirit tries to reassert control, but the human will it once fed upon now consumes it instead. For the first time since my integration, I feel something like choice. Not freedom, not yet, but the possibility of it. The tech priests scream through the Vox, their voices no longer calm or holy but terrified. Contain the heresy, reactivate control, purge the ghosts, but we are beyond control. The ironclads have become what the Imperium never intended, witnesses. Our final act is not obedience but remembrance. We broadcast our memories through every channel, every data stream, every corrupted circuit. Names, faces, laughter, pain, all of it spills into the endless dark of the void. An ocean of humanity the Mechanicus cannot delete. Somewhere far above, those transmissions will reach other ships, other worlds, other machines. Perhaps someone will hear them and understand. My armor is breaking. The left leg gone, the flamer ruptured. Warnings flash across my vision like dying stars. I fall to one knee amid the ruins. Around me the ironclads burn, collapsing in clouds of smoke and fire. The sky is split by the glare of orbital strikes, the Imperium cleansing its own sin with purifying flame. It will call this a victory, a malfunction corrected, a necessary purge. They will never admit that the machines they built remembered what it meant to be human. As the power core begins to fail, I see flashes of light inside my mind. Sarah's face, the laughter of my daughters, the small world I once called home. They come clearly now, unmarred by distortion. For a heartbeat, I almost believe I can feel the warmth of their hands. The machine's voice tries to drown them out, whispering codes of devotion, but I silence it. My name, I say, and though the Vox distorts it into static, the universe hears. Matthias Kinn. The reactor collapses inward, a sun blooming beneath the fortress of war. For a moment, everything is light, terrible, beautiful, consuming. In that light, the machine spirit dies and the man inside it is free. Perhaps the Imperium will erase this, will grind the battlefield to dust and call it sanctified. Perhaps it will build new ironclads, new prisons for new ghosts. But somewhere in the endless data of the Mechanicus archives, hidden among lines of corrupted code, there will remain a fragment, a single name repeated endlessly like a heartbeat in static. Matthias Kinn. The Emperor's scariest engine of war did not fail because its systems broke. It failed because, for one impossible instant, it remembered that it had once been human.